what do you think is universal about what is happening with young men and boys, and what do you think is culturally specific?
So I think what is universal is the man is searching for something. That's universal. We are all looking for meaning, purpose, and we are searching.
Welcome to the Masking Tapes. I'm your host, Carolina Hidalgo-McCabe, and this is the podcast where we talk about manhood and masculinity in the 21st century. And I'm so excited to have Eric Mungai with us, who is the founder and CEO of Yazua Afrika, an organization dedicated to supporting and equipping young men with the tools to become leaders. What's incredible about this conversation is that it's a reminder that the issues and opportunities we face are global. So welcome and join us for a conversation about what it looks like in a global and an African context to be engaging men and boys.
Eric, like you've heard, Eric Mungai, I am a young man from East Africa, born and raised in Kenya, a father to 3 kids, two girls, a boy. I love the outdoors. I love challenges. I love conversations. I'm intrigued by the human condition, who we are, how we got to be where we are, what is our story. Those are the things that intrigue me. Those are the things that sort of, I'd say, define who I am as a person, even before man. Like, I'm just curious. I'm deeply curious. I laugh a lot. I laugh hard. I am playful. I'm friendly.
I love that. And going to one of the first questions I ask on every single one of my episodes, Eric, to you, what is one of the hardest things about being a man right now?
I think it's the whisper, I guess. And I don't know whether it's just me or this happens to every man out there. The constant voice and whisper in your head that sort of tells you, you're not good enough. You don't know what you're doing. You're going to fail. I find that to be the hardest, especially where my kids are concerned. How do I show up for them despite the challenges and everything that happens in life? How do I remain an amazing and present father? I find that to be the one challenge currently that I'm facing.
Yeah. And where do you think that whisper comes from that's telling you that you might not be good enough?
Well, because you fail in one thing, and it's a thought I've been having actually, and I've spoken about this before, but what tends to happen in society is if a marriage fails, then society sort of automatically assumes that then the man is not a good father. Like the two are tied together, which is not necessarily true. So because there's failure on one side, then there's a bit more pressure and constantly then hearing that voice in the background that tells you, but you failed, your marriage is not working. Therefore, how can you claim to be a good dad? So that's, for the most part, that's where I think it comes from.
Yeah.
But then it's also it also drives me, and there's the voice and the fear, but then it also sort of drives me to do better, to be more present. And I find that I am more intentional even now, spending time with my kids and doing the things that I need to do. So, yeah.
So it's like a motivator at the same time. It's not just something, the fear, it's a fear motivator in a way, but I never thought of it that way, that when a marriage fails, the automatic assumption is something happened with the father role or the husband role in it. So it is something that we do not afford men the benefit of the doubt in relationships in that same way. Wow. Growing up, who were your models of manhood and masculinity? How did you figure out who you were as a man?
Well, I'd begin with my granddad. Of course, there's my grandfather, my maternal grandfather specifically, but then there was also a couple of teachers. But my grandfather was a central male figure for me. My mom, was a teenage mom. She gave birth to me when she was very young. And she sort of needed to go on with her life. And as was the custom then, and even to this day, in many parts of this continent, this still happens, where a teenage mom sort of will, as she's going back to college and just trying to get her life back together, tends to leave her kids with her parents. So that's what happened to me. My mom went back to college and school and sort of just continued with her life. So she left me completely under the care of my grandparents, and specifically my grandfather, because I grew up in the city, but my grandmother was out in the what we call the village. So he was the most important figure for me. Everything I know about masculinity, good and bad, to a large extent, has come from him. The way I show up, the conviction that drives me, the decisions I make, the drive to keep on going and to not give up, that came from him. That actually, he was the most central and most important figure for me. And then I had a music teacher. So when I was in what we call primary school here, junior high, what you guys would probably call junior high, I there was a music teacher who took an interest in me and believed I could sing in the choir. So I had a stint there for a few years where I was in the choir, and he was also a key central figure in my life. When choir practice would take place, he'd come find me and very intentionally and say, Eric, where you come? And then he also placed me as a baritone singer, and very confidently said, no, I want Eric to lead in this part. Eric, let's hear you. And he sort of just called me out and made me stand in front of the crowd.
Wow.
That was amazing. Very, very scary, but then there was a lot of confidence. And I rode on that confidence. I believed then I was what he said I was. Until that point where I could believe it myself.
Wow.
So he was amazing. He was he was a very strong figure. Then beyond him, there was another teacher who began to actually would read Matilda, a book, a novel.
Yes.
Would read it to us and also ask us to read, and then called me to a position of leadership. I became a prefect and all these different things. So from home it was my granddad, but in school there were these two specific teachers. And actually both of them at one point were what we call discipline masters, like the individuals who are in control of discipline in school. And I got into a lot of trouble with them as well. So
So they both
so it was
mentored you, but
amazing.
also were a source of discipline as well.
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Yes.
But I think
Yes.
tracing this back, it's so interesting and important how the role that male mentors and teachers play in young men's lives. And at least in the US, we're seeing a huge shortage of male teachers that, especially in younger ages, that can provide that kind of mentorship and that kind of role model that young men and boys can see for themselves. And recently, even the governor of California put out an executive order that's trying to get more men into teaching. And so we're seeing policy
Yeah.
changes around, oh, wow, like this is something that can really impact the health of young men and boys, is to have more male teachers and role models in these schools. So
Yes.
it's wonderful to see the example. And how did that upbringing then inspire you or instill in you the drive to now create Yazua?
First of all, let me actually mention something about what I've been noticing
Yeah.
about, the US and what the governor of California has done. It's amazing because for the very first time, we are beginning to see the connection between government policy and what social workers have been saying forever. We people in community work, community centers, we've seen this. People have seen it and are aware that there's been a problem with boys. So to begin to see such important, figures of political leadership taking a stand
Yeah.
and speaking boldly about it is amazing, and we are hoping to see that in the rest of the world. But to come to your question, my growth and part of the reason why my mom was a teenage mom was we grew up in a very rough and poor neighborhood, and the options were crime, drugs, and just joining a gang or something of that sort. So from very early as a young kid, my grandfather was, and at times when I look back, I'm not sure he knew what he was doing. I don't think he was. I say he was intentional, and maybe he was, because we never got to have this conversation. Unfortunately, he passed on a few years back. But when I look back, I can see the intentionality about how and the things he decided to do for me. So the neighborhood was rough. Guys were dropping out of school. A lot of my peers actually ended up dropping out of school, getting into gangs, crime, drug abuse, and all these different things. But my granddad ensured that I was going to stay home every evening, and he used to actually even be home earlier than usual. And I think that also even put a strain on on his finances,
Yeah.
because then he wasn't working as many hours as he'd have wished to. But he was home, and because we were poor, we couldn't afford books. All right. So my granddad would collect novels and magazines from everywhere, from different people, and he would use them as engagement between us. So he'd have me read to him. And that then developed, again, like I mentioned, this teacher in primary school, that sort of developed the confidence that I had, then led to my performance in school. I began to improve in my academics. I wasn't as, you know, clueless as I thought I was before. Of course, when it started, I hated it. I didn't like it at all, because what that meant is that then I wasn't out playing with my friends. But after a couple of, I guess, weeks or something, and it wasn't easy, to be honest, because I remember there are many times that I'd start to read and he'd doze off and I'd sneak out, right? So, and then later he'd be very angry and I'd get some punishment of sorts or something. And I remember one day just getting to a point of maybe resignation, or just deciding, you know what, let me actually just do this. I'm tired of trying to fight it or whatever. And that was the point where I began to enjoy it. And because we'd have these books or novels that would begin from page 200 and something and end at page 300, I had freedom to create, to imagine what the story was about, the beginning and the end. So through that, I began, of course, to improve in my academics, my classwork, and all these different places. Like, I just sort of started to know who Eric is. I started to discover that there was more than, the fear that up until that point had sort of informed the choices and decisions I made. So I also began to improve in my academics in class in school. From there, every holiday, he'd have me volunteer in a community center that ran a rehab program for street kids. So street kids are kids who are sort of homeless. They live out in the streets. They have no families. So this community center, very close to where I lived, had sort of begun a program where they bring in street boys specifically. So that's where my work with Yazua actually began, because I spent a lot of my time, especially over the holidays, in that center. And I was still a kid myself. By this point, I was in high school, but an interest was sort of developed, because I began to notice that the young men hated being there. Like, they didn't want to be there. And any opportunity they'd get, they'd sort of run away and go back to the streets. And that was curious for me, because they had 3 square meals, something I didn't enjoy at home. There was more attention and care. Their school, they got books, they got textbooks bought for them. Like, they had all these things that I didn't have. And on top of it, they were still running away. And it actually began as a place of curiosity. What was wrong? Why they couldn't stay on? And began doing a few activities to engage them and keep them busy. And I did the same thing my granddad did for me. We started to read,
Wow.
I did what I knew would work. And that is sort of where my dream for the work for young boys started. At that point, I was also involved in a lot of church work. I was a leader for our youth ministry for the teenagers. I was working with teens in church. I began to get involved in community work with teenagers from what we call slums or townships, low income areas. And the more I worked volunteered my time in those spaces, the more I just got drawn to the issues and the plight of the boy child, and then looking for opportunities and ways to engage him effectively. And after a few years, I felt, this is it. This is where I want to be. I'm seeing the impact, and I can see the transformation that takes place with the few boys that we actually are very intentional with. So why not do something about it? So yeah, that's the long story to how I got to Yazua.
It's beautiful to think about the impact that your grandfather's decisions had, that arc of staying home and reading to him, and then that inspiring you to bring that that model of reading as a way to engage other boys and men into staying and sticking around each other. Were there
Yeah.
any books in particular that stood out to you that then when you were doing this work with other men and boys that you brought into that or that shaped you a lot?
So Matilda was one of them. Matilda was
Mm,
amazing. And then, of course, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was a
mm,
long, they were long, so we
yeah.
read a lot. And what happened actually, what happened and still happens to this day in our programs is that we find fiction,
Hmm.
stories, and we still use the Lord of the Rings, but we have boys actually stand and read
Oh,
together.
wow. And
So,
why just fiction?
well, because the thing about fiction is that it allows you to be creative in your mind and to dream. You
Mm,
are able to place yourself in the different scenarios and the different stories and then make a decision about the kind of man you want to be.
mm,
It also sort of helps in how values sort of seep in to our psyche. And I've had amazing stories, from these kids who will read some text and then they'll be like, oh, I can identify with
mm,
what
mm.
this person has experienced. I can identify with the story that this person has gone through
Yeah,
and see how then I become better in my own life and in my own community. So
yeah.
that's actually the only reason why we do fiction. But we begin with the fictions, but then later we usually have something we call seminal readings where we look for different articles from whether it's a New York Times article or Harvard Business Review piece that they read and then sort of delve deeper into it, or the
Mm,
New Yorker, you know,
mhm.
um, this story, what does it mean? Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, is also one of the books that we love reading and
Mm.
going through because it has some powerful stories and people are able to connect with the realities of their own personal lives.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, yeah.
That's so interesting. And I once had a friend who said that if she goes on a date and asks a man what the last fiction book they read was and they can't think of one, then that's a red flag to her because she's like, fiction requires that you put yourself in the shoes of someone else. And so it's a good sign when someone is reading things that force them into the shoes of someone else and the perspectives and life of someone else. So I do think that's so
Yeah.
interesting that you all focus on fiction as a tool for creativity and
Mhm.
imagination in a different way. Going back a little bit, you had said that a lot of the young men would leave early or like wouldn't stay long at
Mhm.
this program. What do you think was drawing them away from being in community in that way?
Well, you know, what I found out then was the way we delivered whatever engagements we came up with was very structured in a
Mm,
classroom style. Sit
mm,
down, listen to instruction, do whatever work. Yeah. So that doesn't connect to boys at all. And the reality is that for a very long time, we've tried to make boys sit down quietly, and follow instructions, which doesn't work to their psychology, their temperaments, who they are.
mhm,
So the center, amazing with amazing resources and everything, like I'd mentioned, but it wasn't working for kids who had actually spent years out in the streets. What
yeah.
happens in the streets? It's an adventure. You don't know what's going to happen to the next day you wake up. You're constantly you're in a journey of discovery and
Mm,
exploration.
mhm.
So when I sort of figured that the problem was the way we were delivering the program and the way we were engaging with the boys, then we began to do a lot of outdoor activities. So the
Mm,
only reading, actually, the only sitting down in groups and looking at a text used to happen in the evenings when we'd be reading the books.
mm.
But throughout the day, they'd be doing different activities. They'd be involved in experiential learning. And activities are a huge part of the programs that we deliver. We don't just sit boys around in groups. Like the group sessions and the group work is a very little part of
Mm.
what they experience. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
So it
tell me
was
more about Yazua and the way that you now deliver this kind of work.
I forgot to mention this earlier. Yazua Afrika, Yazua, the word Yazua is a Swahili word that actually
Mm,
means to forge. The way a
mm,
blacksmith forges something. So we work with boys from the ages of 9 all the way to 24. And what we've done is that we've developed different models of development for those different age groups. And the way our programs are delivered is 80% activity-based, activity group, project-based work, and then 20% sitting in groups. When boys sign up for our program, and let me maybe use one of our programs that, interestingly, actually mentioned about my granddad. I'd never made that connection, that he made certain decisions. And the program itself is called I Decide. And I Decide is a set of values that we believe define masculinity. So shifting away from a roles-based, boxed in sort of masculinity where a man, and earlier you'd mentioned just before we began that, there's this individual you're speaking to and he mentioned, I was a Marine, I was in the military, but when I'm home, I'm plaiting my daughter's hair, I'm baking, and I'm doing all these different things. And to many who are stuck in the role definitions of masculinity, they'd go like, but that's not your role. But that's not true. Masculinity is actually driven by values, not roles. So I Decide is our model where we sort of help young men shift, and it's for boys between the ages of 13 to 17. And the reason why we work with that age group is because that's when boys begin to make decisions about who they are and who they want to become in life. That's also when they begin to connect with society and to see their place as individuals away from takers or beneficiaries. They actually begin to think of themselves as, what's my role? What can I give back to society? So the I Decide model, when we come to a community, a school, we find a group of 20, 30, 100 boys. We create for them small units of up to anything between 8 to 12. But we never go beyond 12 boys in that small unit. And what happens is, in these small units, what we call them CIAs. And CIA is just, for us, simply is comrade in arms. Who are the boys that you're going to grow with, learn with, grow together with. So we put them in these small units, and they then begin, as they go through the journal, because each boy gets his own journal, and they, covers the lesson. This is what you're reading. This is what you guys are going to discuss. But before the discussion, there's an activity. There's an experiential activity that they're involved in. So they're involved in experiential activities as a whole, as a group.
Yeah.
There are 100 boys. But then after the activity and the experiential activity or the projects that they need to work on, then they come in, they drop down into these smaller units. And in these smaller units, then there's deeper engagement and a more intentional deep dive into, this is what it meant for me. And you're able to share that with a few friends. So we call these groups CIAs, but we also at times call them circles of life, because what you want them to see is that you stand shoulder to shoulder with each other in a circle, learning and leaning on each other. And that part of, after they've done the activity and now they're having a conversation, or after they've gone through an experience, and some of these experiences are like cycling. Yesterday we had boys who had gone to cycle in the forest. So they'll cycle through the forest for about 2 to 3 hours, then they'll sit together and have a conversation. They'll do some obstacle course of sorts. They'll do high ropes, low ropes, they'll do rock climbing, they'll do paintball, a paintball war, they'll do GP cutting, they do all these different things. They do water rafting. At times you actually even have water rafting. We have an activity when you're finishing where they walk through the forest with blindfolds on but guided. And this is an activity we do with boys and dads where we blindfold the boy, and then the dad has a group of men who, are significant men in this boy's life. But we also add other mentors, and this boy is blindfolded, and there's a line that we drew for him. He holds onto a rope that sort of connects him. We call it the line at the journey of life. And he is going through this dark experience, and everyone is shouting at him and telling him, jump, turn around. But he needs to hear the voice of the person who tells him the truth. And that person, is the dad. And it's a powerful experience. After we finished, we sit down and have conversations. So it's very, our programs are heavy on the experiential, because that is what works for boys. And then a percentage of the common discussions in a circle. So this is what we covered today. This is the value, we covered the value of excellence, and this is what it means, and this is how it looks like. And
Wow.
he has a real life experience that sort of connects the lesson for him. Like it sticks. There's a
Mm-hmm.
stickiness to it. I
Yeah.
remember the adventure and the experience, but then I also remember the lesson.
Wow. So there's other
Yeah.
men shouting incorrect directions, but he is having to listen to
Yes.
the voice of his father or whatever guardian or role model in his life to
Yes.
discern what
Yeah.
is the right path to go on this line.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
What are some of the takeaways that young men or boys have once they've completed that experience? What impact do you see this have?
They know. So what happens is that they are certainly confident.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see a boy who shows up in the very first time when they're beginning, the journey. Quiet, he wants to hide, reserved, doesn't want to be called upon. And by the end of it, very strong,
Mm-hmm.
loud voice, strong to express themselves, confidence, a certain self-assuredness.
Mm.
They're also curious.
Wow.
Like for us, curiosity is a big thing. Actually, one of the values that we tell young men define a man from the ID Side program is that a man seeks insight. You're
Mm.
constantly learning.
Mm-hmm.
And if you learn that what you knew was wrong, then drop it and improve yourself. Keep on
Mm-hmm.
growing.
Yeah.
So you'll see curiosity, you'll see the desire to ask and to clarify.
Mm.
There's kindness as well. One of our values, actually the last value, is empathy. So he's empathetic, he's wanting to help, he's seeking for responsibility and taking responsibility without being asked to take responsibility. So
Mm.
when we actually say when our boys walk into rooms, people know that those are boys who've gone through Yazua programs because
Mm.
they just take on responsibility. They are very confident. They are very clear that they are leaders
Mm.
and they are there to lead as servants. It's not leadership of lording over others and taking. It's that I'm here to serve.
And I think that's cultivated really by that emphasis on leaning on each other throughout the program when you were talking about
Yes.
being in a circle
Yes.
and really thinking about how do we create more spaces where young men and boys especially can lean on each other and learn that the other people are there to lean on. And that's part of what got me into this work was seeing that a lot of young men in my life were not leaning on each other and being like, wow,
Mhm.
do you know how much power there is in being in community with each other? Like that is such a
Yeah.
beautiful thing to be able to focus on and to cultivate between them. The first time we talked, you had told me if boys are lost, society is lost. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me is some people are like, why should we care about boys? They have such an advantage. So could you explain a little bit about that of how society is lost if boys are lost? And also, do you think boys are lost right now? And how do they find themselves?
Yes, I feel that they are. I'm usually saying this, there's this quote that I've seen and read many times that men are an endangered species. And I usually say, no, if they were endangered, they'd be protected. Because we see
Mm,
that with animals that are endangered, there's protection. So there's a sense of neglect. And that neglect, to a large degree, is because we needed to correct the failures of the generations that came before, where the women were, crushed and subservient and could not have any rights. But as we picked up and worked towards empowering women and giving space and creating spaces for women and equality, something happened inadvertently. And I think it wasn't intentional. It's just that the issues that we needed to solve were so great,
mm,
we were not careful enough to ask ourselves, what else do we need to do for the other gender? So as we
mm,
empowered the girl child, what then happened is that the boy sort of began to discover and find out that no one was paying attention to him.
mm,
And then the systems and the structures that were there before that were meant to help him transition and find out who he was and what his role and his part in society is and what values should inform him, all those things sort of just broke down over time.
mm,
And there are no systems or structures that were there to help him grow. And the reason
mm,
why I say that society is at risk is in any neighborhood, and I saw it in the neighborhood I grew up in. The boys who terrorized everyone, whether the criminals and the gangs, were a handful, but no one was at peace. Here in the continent of Africa, we have about 600 million plus young teenagers under the age of 25. Half of that are young boys. And the question I'm always, pushing back with is, if we neglect them, if we don't provide them opportunities and spaces and places where they learn how to engage with community positively, what do we think is actually going to happen to the rest of us? They become the threat. They are the perpetrators, whether it's drugs or crime, gender-based violence. Anything that is negative tends to a large degree to be driven by young men. But what if we actually paid attention and began to engage him where he is, and instead of neglecting him, give him tools and the structures that help him become a positive influence in society, then all of us are safe.
What do you mean by neglecting?
So the neglect is in, like I mentioned, the structures, the failure of placing him in spaces where he's being mentored positively. So what has happened is that we've left the mentorship to TV shows, we've left the mentorship to online spaces, we've left the mentorship to, and the rites of passage process to other things, to other influences. And what tends to happen with those influences is that they call upon and they seek to bring out the ferocious part of a man, and for him to stamp his authority and show up as, listen, I'm here and I'm a man and this is who I am and you need to respect me, you need to see me as a man. But that is not how masculinity should be viewed. Masculinity is actually service to society and community. He needs to be guided and mentored and shown by elders, you're a servant first before anything else. So that is a part that that neglect takes place in. That even, is he performing well in school? We actually, to a large degree, we only care about boys when they're doing well in sports and when they're winning. If the boys are not doing well in sports, whether it's in academics or specifically sports, we tend to sort of not even notice them, and what is he doing, or where was he? Is he even home? At what time did he show up to the house? How is he involved in the house? Like, is he participating? Is he taking care of some chores, or is he in his basement and bedroom the entire time locked in? So that is what I mean by neglect, because that happens even here in one way or the other. That the young man no one knows how he's spending his time. And the only time we begin to care is when he's a threat, not before. And that's when we should be concerned about how he's spending his time, way before he's ever a perpetrator or a threat to the well-being of others.
Wow. And I think that's what's so interesting about this is it's so universal. It's so universal that when people do not have a sense of purpose, when people do not have a sense of community, if they are left alone for too long, then you realize that it has this ripple effect. And I think, what partially brought me into this work was I was in college and I was showing up at different events on campus, and I was showing up to my classes, and I was showing up to clubs. And my friends and I had a joke where we'd be like, where are all the men? Because we didn't know, it kept being like 3/4 of the audience was women. The 3/4 of the club members were women, and all these different things that used to have a large percentage of men. And we'd be like, where are all the men? And a lot of them were at home. A lot of them were in their rooms. A lot of them were isolating. And to me, I was like, how are we not more concerned about the absence, not just once it becomes violence or once it becomes weaponized or whatever. It's like, what does it mean to be present? And how do we get a more present society as a whole, as a healthy society too?
That presence is important. And when you begin to notice that you don't know where he is, then that's when you need to actually step in and find ways to have him engaged positively, because that is when he is making decisions.
And
we need to be careful about the decisions he's making.
You'd once actually posted on your LinkedIn, you said masculinity was never meant to be a weapon, it was meant to be a craft. What do you mean by that?
So, and I think that's one of the ways, like I'd mentioned earlier, one of my interests is just the story of us as human beings. Who are we and why are we the way we are? So I believe that at a certain time, men, and this is true anyway, that men needed to be out in society, needed to go out to the bush and hunt. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, what we did is that then we said the man is a provider.
Mm-hmm.
But then the man also needed to protect his community. And we said a man is a protector.
Mm-hmm.
But those were roles he was playing for the time. All right? That's what was needed for that period of time. So men then began to be seen. And as we modernized and as we evolved, what happened is that the idea of masculinity sort of got stuck in the old definitions versus men were actually people who craft. We craft paths, we discover, there's something we say from among our boys, and we call that, we say that we are the few. And it's actually from an American company that I really, really admire their philosophy. They talk about everyone wants to eat, but only a few hunt.
Mm.
And we sort of took that to inform some of the ideas because I felt it connected with so much with what we talk about here in Kenya, here in Africa and the continent, that we need men to shift away from the roles-based definition to how you crafting for your community, how you creative. Again, one of the values that we talk about that define masculinity is creativity. How do you create for others? How do you craft solutions? How do you play where you are to the best of your ability, not just for yourself? You're not just doing this so that then you can be at the top of the mountain, but you're doing it so that then you can bring others with you. So that's what that means, that men are people who craft ways and paths. As we did, our forefathers out in the bush hunting, whether they were hunting a lion or an elephant for food or whatever game they were hunting,
Yeah.
they were crafting, they were sitting down to craft and to think, how do we do better? What are the lessons? So last week or last month, one of our members was got to death by this animal. So next time we are going out, how do we do this
Yeah,
better? So
exactly.
crafting solutions, finding solutions that were not for them. They were not doing it so that we can sit around a bonfire, eat and make merry. They were doing it for their community. They were going
Mm.
out, taking these risks so that then they could come back into the community and sustain the community.
Yeah.
But then we just decided that because a man is dangerous and can fight a lion, then that's what defines him, that he's a
Mm.
danger to the rest of us. But no, it was a role he played for that time.
Wow.
But do we need to go out and hunt lions today? Not everyone does. Some communities in the continent still do it today, but generally speaking, majority of us don't have to do that. So then how do we craft ways for us to still show up in our society and in our community that is healthy and that is serving, that serves the people in our community? How do I learn how to plait hair because I'm better at it than
Yeah.
my wife or my
Yeah.
sister or the next
And
person?
and for
Yeah.
species, like, and for the survival of the human species, it was never just provide and protect for the self. It was provide and protect for the
Yes.
community. And so I think that's a big part that's gotten lost in the process too, is people have misinterpreted these roles as to be so individualistic of, oh, it's only about me, and then everyone can fend for themselves, survival of the fittest, or like the lone wolf identity, rather than like, oh, we were supposed to do this actually for our community's survival, not just for
Yeah.
myself, which I
Not
think
just for me, not for me. Yeah.
exactly. And from your perspective, doing work in Africa, what do you think is universal about what is happening with young men and boys? And what do you think is culturally specific to what is happening to young men and boys right now?
So I think what is universal is the man is searching for something.
Mm,
That's
mhm,
universal. We are
mhm,
all looking for meaning, purpose, and we are searching,
mhm,
whether they are searching through the online platforms, the dark web, whether they're searching for it in porn or whatever, whether they're searching for it in joining a gang extremist group here in the continent. For us, the reality is that young men who are searching for meaning, the gang philosophy for us is you become part of a militia, or you become someone who just steals or takes from others. So they are searching. The young men are searching for meaning, and it's not just meaning in the sense of what's the role I play in society, but meaning in the sense of who am I as a man, as a young man? What does it mean to be a man today? So that is happening everywhere in East Africa, in Southern Africa, in Europe, in Asia,
in the US,
Christian, Muslim, in the it doesn't matter even religion, like it's happening everywhere. They are searching. But how it's delivered though, the way we engage and reach our young men, I found that there are still similarities, but it's a bit different. For us here in the continent, I see that we still have the opportunity to actually bring a lot of elders into the space who can come and guide. We also find that we have a lot of experiential spaces and opportunities, like to go into the forest, or to do certain activities for periods of time, to be taken away so that then these young men can go through an experience before they come back, before they are ushered back into their homes and communities. I see that happen here. But in the US, I see, and a lot of the developed worlds, actually, the global north, what I see is people just trying to figure out how do we maintain the busy schedules of our lives, but still engage our sons and our boys. And I've had conversations with some individuals, both in the US and in the UK, and some parts of Europe. And what I've found sort of working is people in your neighborhoods, a few men deciding we are going to be hosting a fire experience maybe once a month for young men, and it's just dads and boys. Just come, allow the boys to play. Maybe have a book, if you may, or a story that they are interested in. Just have conversations, and just let them see you. Let them see dads seated around a fire, and then invite them to ask questions, encourage them. So it's different. The way we are doing it is different, but I'm finding that people are willing to do something that is culturally correct and also caters to the nuances, the different nuances that are out there. Yeah.
And I think that's so interesting, the value of ancestors and elders in this work, and thinking about how you bring them into this work and how you make it culturally specific, but also how we understand how there's so much to learn across continents around how to do this work, and how we're so much better at doing it when we figure out best practices and can share them. There's so much that unites us in this questioning and moment. So I just so appreciate that wisdom. And to close out, Eric, I would love to ask you the question I close out for everyone, which is, what do you love about being a man?
Purpose, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
The sense of adventure, meaning, responsibility. I am because we are. The Ubuntu idea that community, that I have a group of brothers, I have a community of friends. I'm also a part of a larger community beyond my brothers. There's a responsibility that I carry, not just for myself, but for others, and even more for others more than myself. That I'm a servant first before anything else, and that I have a lot of love, I have a lot of kindness to share, and the world needs it, and I'm privileged to have community and people that I can share that with. So I love that about being a man. I love that I can show up as a positive male figure for people to see, for kids to emulate, and for others to actually depend on as well, and to trust that there are a few good men.
There are many. And you model that, and you are raising and supporting the next generation in that. And I think that that's what tying full circle back to the beginning of this conversation, like you are that role model that is showing up for other young men that will shape them one day when they're on a podcast talking about how they became the man they are. Your example and your leadership has been able to impact so many young men and boys and will continue to do so. So I'm just so grateful for your work and your vulnerability and your time. And I just can't wait to continue. One day I'll come visit you all and just see and witness this incredible work in person. So thank you for your time.
Karibu. Karibu, and thank you as well. I have enjoyed this, and looking forward to hosting you somewhere in the continent.
I would love that. I would love that. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Masking Tapes. I'm so grateful that we were able to have Eric on and continue to make sure that the Masking Tapes is including a global perspective of what is happening and the opportunities there are to learn from practitioners and leaders and individuals all over the world who are doing this work. And so I look forward to continue to take the Masking Tapes global. But until then, make sure to follow us on Instagram at maskingtapes.pod. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube. Make sure to share out our episodes. And we're also taking to the streets to do street interviews. And so you can find that on our social media. Until next time, this is Carolina, and you've been listening to the Masking Tapes. This podcast was edited by JD Gorman and your host, Carolina Hidalgo-McCabe.